a quiet corner of the world, far beyond roads and railways, where maps turned vague and winds carried secrets, there was a forest most people forgot. It wasn't marked on any chart. No signs pointed toward it. And yet, those who needed rest the most somehow found their way to it. They called it the Forest of Everdream. One soft and silvery evening, just as the sky blushed into twilight, a traveller named Emrin arrived at the edge of a quiet meadow. Emrin had been walking for many days, not running from anything, not chasing something either, but simply moving with a tired heart and a hopeful spirit. Ahead of him, mist curled over the ground like slow-moving clouds, and tall trees rose in silence beyond it. Their branches swayed gently though there was no breeze, and the air shimmered faintly, as if the whole forest were exhaling in a dream. Emrin paused at the edge. A narrow path wound into the mist, soft, mossy, and almost glowing. He didn't know where it led, but he felt deep in his chest that it was inviting him in. He stepped forward. At once the world behind him faded, not vanished, just quieted. The sounds of birds softened, the feeling of time loosened, and the deeper he walked, the lighter his thoughts became, like someone had gently set them down beside the trail. Tall ferns unfurled at the edges of the path. Pale blue fireflies flickered lazily between them, lighting his way. He passed under arching trees whose trunks were thick and warm-colored like polished amber. Their bark smelled faintly of vanilla and cedarwood. The forest didn't speak. It hummed. Each step Emrin took made the path softer. His boots barely made a sound. Somewhere high above, a gentle owl called once, not a warning, just a hello. After some time, he came to a little wooden gate, resting open. A smooth stone was set beside it, with words etched in looping script. "Welcome, dreamer. Walk softly. The forest is listening." Emrin smiled, not because he understood, but because something inside him already trusted this place. And trust was a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. He passed through the gate, and suddenly the mist cleared. Before him lay a small clearing surrounded by tall trees that curved slightly inward, like they were leaning close to protect the space. In the center was a round stone bench, surrounded by tiny glowing mushrooms. A little stream sang quietly nearby. He sat on the bench, exhaled slowly, and listened. No rush, no questions, just rest. The wind above moved like a lullaby. One leaf floated down and landed on his knee. It was pale silver and warm to the touch. Emrin held it gently and looked up. The stars were beginning to appear one by one, and for the first time in many weeks, felt still. The morning light drifted gently through the forest, though no sun was clearly visible. Just a warm golden haze, like a dream that hadn't quite let go. The soft hush of the trees carried the freshness of new beginnings, and Emrin, still seated on the stone bench in the clearing, blinked slowly awake. He didn't remember falling asleep, but his body felt lighter, as if the weight of yesterday had dissolved into the moss beneath him. Around him, the clearing had shifted subtly. Dew clung to the glowing mushrooms in little silver beads. A fresh trail, barely visible, wound through the grass, guiding his eyes forward. With quiet steps, Emrin followed. The trail led between two towering trees whose branches formed a natural arch. As he passed beneath it, the air changed, deeper, richer, filled with the scent of pine and something faintly floral. Tiny petals floated down from above, carried on a breeze he couldn't feel. He walked slowly now, his boots making almost no sound. The forest seemed to know his pace, moving with him. He passed clusters of stones that seemed carefully placed, like old markers, and little wooden chimes that swayed without wind, whispering faint notes into the quiet. Soon, he came upon a clearing much larger than before. At its center stood a tree unlike any Emrin had ever seen. It was immense, its trunk the width of a cottage, its bark smooth and gently glowing, the color of candlelight. Its branches stretched wide and high, cradling the sky like a living cathedral. Draped from its limbs were delicate vines covered in glowing white leaves, and from those leaves fell a slow and steady shimmer of light, like golden snowfall. It didn't feel ancient, it felt eternal. Emrin stepped forward with reverence. There was no fear here, only stillness, and something he could only describe as welcome. At the base of the great tree was a curved stone bench carved right into its roots. Upon the wood beside it, someone had etched a message in flowing script. "Speak your heart, the tree remembers." Emrin sat. For a while he said nothing. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. The kind of silence that waited patiently, as though time itself had slowed just to give him this moment. He looked up into the branches, where light glimmered like stars trapped in morning dew. And then softly, he spoke. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The tree remained still, but Emrin felt the quiet deepen, not as judgment, but as a gentle pull, inviting more. "I've been walking for days," he continued, "looking for something, anything. I thought I needed a destination, but maybe I needed to stop." The air seemed to hum, not with noise but with understanding. He leaned back against the trunk. It was surprisingly warm, the kind of warmth that sank beneath the skin and settled in the chest, like leaning into an old friend. As he closed his eyes, memories rose, not loudly, but softly. A grandmother's lullaby, rain tapping on a window, the smell of cinnamon from a long-forgotten kitchen. He let them come, let them go. The tree, he realized, wasn't listening to his words. It was listening to his heart, and it was remembering. Suddenly, he felt something shift beside him. A single leaf, larger than the others, had drifted down and landed in his lap. It shimmered silver and gold, and in its center glowed a small, intricate mark, a spiral of light, like the path he had walked. He touched it gently, and in that moment, a soft voice echoed in his thoughts. Not words exactly, but feeling. "You are not lost, you are arriving." His eyes opened slowly. The leaf was still there, cool against his fingers. He smiled for the first time in a long while, not because everything made sense, but because here, it didn't need to. He placed the leaf into a pouch on his belt and stood. Behind the tree, another path had appeared, narrow, winding, glowing faintly like before. The forest had gently opened the way forward. He turned once more to the great tree and bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. And as he stepped away, the vines above rustled softly, not from wind, but in reply, in the quiet village of Sukin, where the wind whispered and flowers nodded in the dusk. A single lantern floated through the sky each night. It wasn't tied to a pole or carried by hand. It glowed softly and drifted gently on its own. People called it the Sleepy Lantern. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the lantern would rise and glide slowly above rooftops, casting a warm golden light. Wherever it went, stillness followed. The wind slowed, birds hushed, even the stars twinkled a little softer. One night, a boy named Rayan followed it to a quiet field. He lay down in the grass, eyes wide, heart calm. The lantern paused above him for a moment, then blinked like a soft good night and drifted away. Rayanne yawned, curled up, and slipped into the sweetest sleep beneath the stars. From then on, the lantern always found its way to those who needed rest, floating gently, quietly, carrying peace. The path beyond the golden tree wound slowly through a narrow glade, where light dappled the earth in gentle circles. The air was cooler here, not cold, but touched by something older. Each step Emryn took seemed to hush the forest even more, until the only sound was the rhythmic beat of his own breath and the soft brush of his boots on moss. There was no hurry. In Everdream, time did not press. It drifted like mist, present but gentle, unconcerned with clocks or calendars. After some time, Emryn came to the edge of a wide, still lake. Its surface reflected the dusky sky above, a soft blue-violet painted with early stars. The water was so calm, it looked like glass, save for the occasional ripple made by drifting petals or the slow flight of glowing moths. Stretching across the lake was a bridge unlike any Emryn had seen before. It wasn't made of stone or wood alone, but something older, woven from braided roots, polished crystal, and light itself. It arched gently over the lake, its surface lined with glowing etchings that pulsed faintly with each breath of wind. At the entrance to the bridge stood a small wooden marker. No post, no nails, just wood, smoothed by time, with a short message carved into it. Cross only when your thoughts are quiet. Emryn paused. He had no thoughts loud enough to stop him, but he understood. This bridge wasn't a test. It was an invitation. He took a breath, held it, let it go. The breeze stirred gently across his face, and with it, the last whispers of wandering thoughts fell away. Worry, fear, even hope. All softened like footprints in sand. And then, he stepped onto the bridge. It made no sound beneath him, just a faint glow, like the soft touch of moonlight on water. With every step, the world seemed to dim around him. Not darker, just quieter. The stars above grew brighter. The lake below shimmered with memories, not visions, feelings. He felt the joy of a childhood snowfall, the stillness of sitting beside a candle on a rainy evening, the warmth of hands held long ago. Nothing spoke these things, yet they drifted beside him, soft as fog, guiding him forward. Halfway across the bridge, he noticed a creature resting on its edge. It was small, curled like a sleeping fox, but its fur shimmered with tiny flecks of silver and pale gold. As Emryn approached, it opened one eye, large, glowing, ancient, and yet it yawned like any sleepy animal, stretched its back, and blinked at him slowly. Emryn smiled. The creature blinked back, then closed its eyes again, as if to say, "You may pass." He continued walking, not needing permission, but grateful for the quiet company. The other side of the bridge rose gently onto a smooth bank of moss and wildflowers. As he stepped off, he felt something shift behind him. He turned. The bridge had vanished, not abruptly, just folded into the mist, as though it had never been there at all. And yet, his heart was calmer. The lake behind him no longer reflected his thoughts, because they no longer needed reflecting. Ahead, another path waited, but Emryn remained for a moment longer. He sat beneath a nearby tree, whose bark shimmered with silver speckles, its roots curled like sleeping arms. The lake glowed in the distance, now hidden partly by leaves and fog. The stars continued to gather above. He didn't feel lost. He didn't feel found either. He just felt still. And for now, stillness was more than enough. As Emrin rose from beneath the tree and left the shimmering lake behind, the path ahead grew softer, wider. The air had a new warmth to it, not hot, but kissed with the scent of distant blossoms and something sweetly familiar, like the warmth of a melody remembered in the quiet of night. The trees thinned, the light brightened, and suddenly he stepped into a meadow. It was vast and open, cradled gently by rolling hills. Tall grass swayed with the rhythm of a silent tune. The colours were not bold or bright, but soft and silken. Blues that whispered, golds that glowed, lavenders that hummed. Above, the sky had turned to a rich twilight. Not day, not night, but the quiet in between, when everything feels sacred. The most striking sight, though, was at the centre of the meadow. A tree stood there, tall and elegant, its trunk slender and smooth like an instrument carved from moonwood. Its branches curved upward and outward, shaped like the frame of a harp. From its limbs stretched hundreds of thin, glistening strands of silver thread, each catching the breeze and trembling gently. It wasn't just a tree, it was a living harp, and as the wind passed through it, it sang, not with lyrics, not with voices, but with feelings, pure, delicate and deep. Notes rose and fell across the meadow like drifting petals. The melody was soft, unhurried, full of longing and peace. It was music that made your heart ache in the sweetest way, not from sadness, but from memory. Emrin felt his breath catch. He didn't move, didn't dare speak. He simply walked, barefoot now, into the swaying grass, letting it brush his legs like a welcome. He sat near the harp tree and listened. The song was different now, as if it knew he was there. It carried the echo of a lullaby he'd once heard long ago, one his mother used to hum when he was small and afraid of the wind outside. A tune she barely finished, but that stayed in his chest for years. The meadow played it for him now, and not just for him. All around the clearing, other small creatures sat quietly. A doe and her fawn curled into the tall grass. A pair of glowing birds perched on a flowering bush. Even a large turtle with moss growing on its back, resting in the shadows. They too were listening, breathing slowly, remembering. Emrin closed his eyes. The music flowed into him like warm rain. He saw faces he'd almost forgotten. He felt laughter from times that felt far away, but there was no ache, only release. The harp tree sang his life back to him, not as a story of pain or regret, but as a song of becoming. And as the final notes drifted away, he let out a slow, deep breath, the kind that empties you just enough to make room for something new. As he opened his eyes, the meadow glowed a little brighter. A soft breeze stirred, and with it, a single petal floated down from the highest branch of the harp tree. It twirled in the air and landed gently in his palm. It was warm. He held it to his chest, eyes closing. The path beyond the meadow rose slowly, winding upward through a stretch of trees that stood quiet and tall. They didn't glow like the others. They didn't sing or shimmer or hum. They simply stood, watching still, like guardians of a truth too deep for words. Emrin walked slowly now. His breath was calm, but something inside him had begun to shift. Not fear, not sorrow, but that quiet ache that comes when a beautiful dream is about to end. Each step forward felt like part of a goodbye. The moss beneath his feet was cool. Ferns brushed his hands as he passed. The forest around him had grown silent, not empty, but reverent, as though it too knew that his journey was nearly complete. reached the top of the hill. There, nestled in the earth and stone, was a single arched doorway. It stood open. No gate, no lock, just an arch of smooth grey stone covered in soft vines, and above it, a final message carved in ancient script. You may leave or stay forever. The choice is only yours. Emrin stood before it, and for the first time in his journey, he hesitated. He had seen the golden tree that listened without speaking. He had crossed the bridge that read his thoughts. He had heard the meadows sing his memories back into being. And here, at the very edge of it all, he was given a choice. Go forward, or remain. Behind him, the forest was still, not pulling him back, not urging him forward, just waiting. He sat down on the soft ground beside the arch, closed his eyes, and in that moment, the emotions he'd been carrying, the silent ones, rose like mist. Memories he hadn't spoken out loud, grief that hadn't yet been named, the ache of growing older and further from simpler times, the weight of trying to be strong for too long. They didn't crash over him. They didn't drown him. They simply came and were seen. The forest, like before, listened. A quiet breeze touched his face. Tears welled in his eyes, not of pain, but of release. He didn't wipe them away, let them fall. Each one a gentle offering to the stillness around him. For a long time, he sat there, in silence, in feeling. And slowly, as if guided by light, he reached into the pouch at his side. Inside it were the gifts of his journey, the glowing silver leaf from the golden tree, a sliver of crystal from the quiet bridge, the warm petal from the meadow's final note. He laid them gently in his hand, and then he smiled, a small, tired, but honest smile, not because the forest had fixed him, but because it had reminded him he wasn't broken. He stood, looked through the archway. On the other side was not a new land, no kingdom, no mystery, just light, software familiar, like the gentle glow behind closed eyelids before sleep. And suddenly, he understood. The gate wasn't an exit, it was a reflection. It didn't open to the world, it opened inward, to the home within himself. He stepped forward, and the forest didn't disappear. It folded around him, like a cloak of quiet stars. A final breeze brushed his cheek, warm, kind, like a goodbye and a welcome all at once. And then, stillness. In a quiet corner of the world, where the land gives way to the sea, there stood a lighthouse on the edge of a cliff. It was not grand or towering, just tall enough to see the waves, just strong enough to hold the wind. They said the lighthouse had not worked in many years. No ships passed that way anymore. No one needed its light. And yet, every evening, just as the sky turned a soft shade of lavender, the lighthouse would flicker. Not from electricity, but from something deeper, as if it remembered its purpose, as if it was still waiting. Not far from that quiet lighthouse, a traveller named Callan walked alone along the cliffs. He wasn't lost, but he wasn't looking for anything either. He had left his home months ago, with a heart too heavy and hands too tired to stay in one place. Some people walk to reach a destination. Callan walked to remember how to breathe. The sea stretched endlessly beside him, dark and endless, but somehow peaceful. It didn't ask anything of him. It just was. As twilight deepened, a soft golden glow caught his eye. The lighthouse. It stood like a gentle guardian, old but not broken, forgotten but not abandoned. Something inside Callan stirred. He hadn't planned to stop, But something about that light felt familiar, like a voice calling him from a dream he used to know. He turned toward the narrow path that led to it. The wind picked up, brushing his coat with cool fingers. The grass whispered beneath his boots. He walked slowly, each step quieter than the one before, as if the world itself wanted him to arrive gently. The lighthouse door was old but unlocked. He stepped inside. The air smelled of salt and thyme. Wooden stairs spiraled upward, lit faintly by the last rays of the day. He climbed, step by step, until he reached the lantern room. And there, at the center, was the light. Not a bulb, not flame, just a soft golden orb, hovering silently, pulsing slowly, like the heartbeat of the sea. Callan stepped closer, and without knowing why, he whispered, "I remember you." The light pulsed once, brighter, then softened again. He sat on the wooden floor, leaning against the curved wall of the lantern room. Through the glass, he saw stars rising above the ocean. Waves rolled like deep breaths. The world had grown silent, and so had he. Tears gathered in his eyes, not of pain, but of something older, something unnamed. He remembered the stories his grandfather told him about lighthouses that waited for lost sailors even when no ships came. The lullabies his mother sang when the power would go out during winter storms. The promise he once made to someone, that he will return. He had forgotten all of it, or maybe just buried it. But the lighthouse hadn't. It had remembered for him. And now, as the stars gathered outside and the light pulsed beside him, Callan felt the weight in his chest shift. Not gone, but lighter, like a coat you take off when the rain has passed. He rested his head against the wall, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Not because the world had changed, but because he had found a place quiet enough to hear himself again. The lighthouse didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its light filled the room, and the traveler who had forgotten how to stay, stayed. There is a train that only runs after midnight. It doesn't follow the tracks of ordinary railroads. You won't find it on any map, and no ticket can be bought to ride it. And yet, every now and then, on certain quiet nights, when the stars breathe a little closer and the world grows still, it appears, soft as a sigh, slow as a lullaby. Its whistle is not loud, but deep, like a memory calling you home. That night, Elias stood at the edge of an old forest platform, breath curling in the cool air. He didn't know how he'd found it, only that something had led him there. Perhaps a dream, perhaps a longing. All around, the trees stood hushed beneath the silver sky. A few fireflies floated like stars fallen too low. The earth was soft with moss. And then, he heard it. The low hum of wheels on distant tracks. The sigh of steam. A slow, glowing train pulled into view. Its windows warm with golden light. Its body dark and smooth like polished stone. There were no signs, no passengers disembarking. Just the door, gently opening. Elijah hesitated only a moment, then stepped aboard. Inside, the train was quiet. Not empty, but peaceful. A woman in a soft green coat was reading beside a rain-smeared window. A child curled beside her, fast asleep, with a stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. An old man played a tune on a silver harmonica, so soft it sounded like a breeze through reeds. None of them looked up. Not because they didn't care, but because they trusted him to belong. Elijah walked slowly down the velvet aisle. Each car felt different. Some were filled with warm lamps and bookshelves, others with glowing stars on the ceiling. as if you were inside the night sky itself. He chose a small booth with a single seat and a large window. Outside, the forest blurred past, shadows and starlight mixing together like brushstrokes. And slowly, he let his shoulders fall. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding them. It had been a long time since he'd let himself rest. Not just sleep, but truly rest. He didn't know where the train was going, but something inside him whispered. It wasn't about the destination. It was about remembering. And so he sat, and the train moved on. Time did not pass the same way on that train. There were no clocks, only moments. In one, he sipped a cup of tea that tasted like his childhood. Warm cinnamon, sweet vanilla, and something he couldn't name but knew in his bones. In another, he gazed into the window and saw faces. Not as reflections, but memories. His mother singing softly in the kitchen, flour on her cheeks. A friend he hadn't spoken to in years, laughing beside a fire. A letter he never sent. A promise he never broke, but forgot to keep. Tears came then, not of sadness, but of soft release. He didn't hide them. The train didn't mind. The night cradled him like an old lullaby. And the deeper they rode into the dark, the lighter he felt. At some point, the harmonica stopped. The child's rabbit slipped to the floor. Even the fireflies seemed to rest. Elia leaned back, head against the soft cushion, eyes fluttering closed. The train moved on, not toward morning, but toward quiet, toward peace. And as the stars outside began to fade into the mist, a gentle voice whispered, maybe from the train, maybe from inside him. Sleep found him, not as a thief, but as a friend. And the train, that only runs at night, carried him gently through the dreams he didn't know he still needed.